Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, Urbana Socialist Forum, or as we like to say in this televised version of the show, UPTV. These views are our own, and by our in this instance, I mean myself. I wish there were more of us than just me, but there is only me here right now. Sorry, that's a very noisy thing to do, but I have to position the microphone properly because otherwise it doesn't work very well. Anyway, welcome. It is a lovely, lovely spring day out there. It could hardly be lovelier. I suppose it would be better if we had a different government in place, but that's as maybe. So let's get right to the point here. A lot goes on, a lot doesn't go on. It's strange. It's like things happen and they don't happen at the same time. I'm not really even sure how to explain it. We've talked about this before on the show where, like, the president, for example, will make some statement, and then everybody gets into a flutter, and we're all talking about it, but not a lot actually happens as a result of it. And then at other times, they do things and cause huge amounts of damage and great problems for people. And so it's really hard to know how to react and when to react, I guess. I mean, how to react is no and push back on everything, because there's really nothing that comes from the White House that I think has any validity or is based in any way on what, reality? It's really strange. This is a really strange period to live in, because on one hand, you know, I'm trained to argue with reason and logic. That's just a lifelong training for me. This is how you present things. You make a reasoned, logical argument that starts with a premise, develops by using proofs and examples, and then comes to a conclusion that, yes, this is right because of all these things that I've said. Here's the truth. Unfortunately, there is a growing constituency for faith-based belief system. And I don't mean a belief system that responds to, like, say, a spiritual beliefs, spiritual faith, or something like that. I mean, literally, there's a belief system that is based on really wanting it to be true. We want this to be true, therefore we're going to only believe things that tell us that this is true and not believe anything that tells us it isn't. So reasoned argument against that kind of thinking just doesn't work. And that is, it would be nice to say, well, it's the fault of Donald Trump. It is not the fault of Donald Trump. It is the fault of years and years of, what can I call it? Conservative thinking? Not even conservative. It's like all these labels don't really have deeper meaning anymore. They're labels that used to, or presumably used to, describe a way of thinking, a political philosophy. So a conservative was someone who had this certain set of beliefs, generally speaking, and tended to judge new questions based on this sort of way of looking at things that they developed. But for a number of years now, that has not been the case. As the sort of the broader receptiveness, national receptiveness for conservative ideas has waned, an increasing number of people have opted to try to create a sort of a separate reality, try to mold reality to fit their preferred vision of the world, the universe, the way things work. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but there has been a tendency for a number of years for people to just believe what they wanted to believe. And now this is, of course, true of everybody, of all political leanings, all faiths. People in general tend to believe what they want to believe. But most of us, I would say the majority of people, are open to being persuaded. And they attempt, as much as they'd like for things to be a certain way, they try to look at all the facts that they have available to them and make their final judgments on things based on those facts. So as much as I would like to believe, for example, that we can all work together and be happy and live in harmony, if we just try, I know that doesn't work. I know it hasn't worked. I know it will work for small groups of people for limited periods of time in certain places, but overall, it doesn't work. I've been involved in organizations where, for example, the ideal took precedent over everyone's learned experience on how things work. And so we tried our darndest to make the ideal work, and it just didn't. I would like to be able to trust everybody. I know I can't. I try to offer trust as my first choice. When dealing with a new situation or a new person, I try to say, okay, I'm going to consciously attempt to trust that this person is a good person, that they want the best, and that we can work things out. I try to go into things with that attitude, but at the same time, I know that it is not accurate 100% of the time, maybe not even most of the time. I don't know. But it is not accurate enough for that to be the only method that I operate by. So, I feel, at least for myself, that I look at things and I try to be fair about them. And I try to take in other ways of thinking about things. But there is a growing constituency for just believing what they want to believe. Up to a point, I think that the majority of that group would still be open to persuasion if they allowed persuasive voices in. The problem is that they are now given safe harbors because of the internet, in part because of the internet, and it's what it allows people to self-segregate to interest groups that I'm into Beanie Babies, so I'm going to go to the Beanie Baby group online, and I'm going to only talk to other Beanie Baby lovers, and then so I'll live in a world where Beanie Babies are, gosh, that's a really dated comparison there, but that was the first thing that came to mind. But you know what I mean. The internet has created these spaces for people to flock together and to sort of hang out and just listen to each other. But the news, up until, the last maybe decade or so, had a stubborn way of being just, sorry, as much as you'd like to believe it, here's what's going on. And of course, there's always been fake news. There's always been people spewing propaganda and fudging the facts to get their point across. But there were enough other voices countering that in the sort of general overall marketplace, that as long as you didn't marginalize yourself to the fringes where you only, got your information from one source, you were forced to see other points of view. You were forced to hear a different set of facts or a set of facts that maybe wasn't quite as aligned with your preferred way of thinking. But with the rise, particularly of Fox News, hate to say it, but Fox News is a purveyor of propaganda. They mix it in with real news so that they can say, no, what do you mean? We're a news organization. Look at all this news we cover. They do cover news, and they do have a great deal of content that tells you what's going on. But they tailor the way a lot of that is delivered, and particularly the way their opinions are delivered, and they kind of mix it together in a way that is very clever, that just gives you a certain perspective on things and nothing else. And so that has provided safe haven for a number of people who look at that, and then they've got talk radio, AM talk radio. They've got, they have now a number of choices that all kind of bounce the same perspective back and forth to the point where you can live in a sort of a cushy echo chamber of ideas that you prefer being bounced back and forth and no other perspective being allowed in. That is incredibly dangerous, and it is getting worse as time goes on, and I don't know what it's going to take to change that. But something is going to need to change that, because there are things happening in the real world that are dangerous and need to be addressed, but are not being addressed because there are enough people who are not hearing about that, or hearing about it only in a way that presents it in an entirely different fashion than what is going on. I'm being vague here, but immigration is one of those topics. You have the president and his cohorts, we'll call them that, his little coterie of cheerleaders that he likes to hang out with and exchange ideas with, that are trying to create an impression about immigration and immigrants that is simply not true. They are trying to rewrite the story to fit their chosen narrative, that immigrants are dangerous, that they're criminals, mostly. Enough of them are criminals that we can't trust, that we can't know who is and who isn't. So we have to keep them all out because they're all bad, or we have to, vet them so thoroughly that, almost nobody can get in. That sort of thinking, that all these kinds of things, that they're bad for us as a people, that they're harming our country, that their very presence, their entry to this country is dangerous. It's an invasion. It is a plague, if you will. This kind of thinking has no basis in fact. You can, of course, find little bits and pieces of things that support this narrative if you want to, because immigrants are, like everybody else, just people. So there are good people, bad people, people in between that are sometimes good and sometimes bad, etc. So it's easy to cherry pick and say, oh, well, look, this person was murdered by an immigrant. This person was robbed by an immigrant. This person's job was taken by an immigrant. You can find examples of things that immigrants have done that you can use to support this narrative that all immigrants are bad, or that immigration is bad, or that there's something dangerous about it, and so on. But if you actually know and work with and study immigration, you will see that those people are in the minority. Those situations are in the minority. That is not a big problem. That same kind of scaremongering could be focused or brought to bear on virtually any group of people that you cared to choose. Yeah, that makes sense. For example, the media for years has been demonizing and criminalizing black people, until every time you turn on the TV, it's like another crime by a black person. They just make it seem that way. Terrorists are Islamic terrorists. Islam, they're Muslims. Those are terrorists. Everybody else that does the same stuff, they're not terrorists. They're crazy people. They're people with problems. They're, it's like, it's all how you define things. So these things are going on all the time based on racism, based on classism, based on any number of things. So it's not that I'm not trying to insinuate that this president or the current conservative, whatever you want to call it, microcosm or whatever, conservative universe, is alone in their practice of this. I'm merely saying that they are doing it too, and they're doing it consciously, and they're using it as a tool to try to get what they want, to keep people divided, to fire up one group of people into thinking that we must support these guys. They're the only ones trying to save us. The president is the only one trying to save us from the scourge of immigrants who are coming in. And anybody who's arguing against him is sympathetic to that. They want these people coming in and taking our jobs and stealing our women and raping and bringing drugs and doing all these things. It's like it builds into this whole thing. So, as far as the propaganda wars goes, that's one thing. That can be fought with other propaganda. That can be dealt with in a variety of different ways. But we have a president, a person in charge with actual power, who is pushing and bending even the rule of law, because supposedly laws are what keeps various individuals from straying outside what society considers acceptable behavior. Now, we know from previous programs that laws can be written or interpreted in ways that they benefit one group at the expense of another. So the law itself is not some magic thing that's like, well, as long as everybody follows the law, everything will be fine. That is definitely not true. If everybody follows the law as it is written, some people will benefit, some people will lose, and that creates a problem right there. And then how you interpret that law, you can further increase the number of people that are being disenfranchised in one way or another by just making certain things seem more illegal for them, or it's illegal when they do it, but not when they do it. Things like that, like drug use, for example, amongst teenagers, for a long time has been pathologized and demonized in certain parts of society, and then kind of winked at and nodded at and just sort of poo-pooed in others. So you have the classic example is black teenagers going to prison for long periods of time for doing the exact same things that white teenagers are given probation or even just a slap on the wrist and allowed to walk free. So, the law is no magic thing, but it at least provides a kind of an outer edge to what people can do in order to further their own personal agendas, let's say. And so I have a couple of stories about how the law is being used or misused right now that I want to read to you. And so you can get a sense of where we're kind of going and what can happen if we don't pay attention, A, and act, B. So here's the number one story. This is the thing right now. And it's about Trump, of course. What else? Who else? It's entitled, I forgot to copy the title. Anyway, it reads as follows. President Donald Trump has been pushing to reinstate broader family separation policies and sought to close the U.S.-Mexico border at El Paso, Texas, as his conflict with Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen reached a boiling point. 2 Thursdays ago, in a meeting at the Oval Office with top officials, including Nielsen, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, top aides Jared Kushner, Mercedes Schlapp, and Don Scavino White House counsel Pat Cipollini, something like that, and more. The president, according to one attendee, was ranting and raving, saying border security was his issue. Senior administration officials say that Trump then ordered Nielsen and Pompeo to shut down the port of El Paso the next day, Friday, March 22nd, at noon. The plan was that in subsequent days, the Trump administration would shut down other ports. Nielsen told Trump that would be a bad idea, a bad and even dangerous idea, and that the governor of Texas, Republican Greg Abbott, has been very supportive of the president. She proposed an alternative plan that would slow down entries at legal ports. She argued that if you close all the ports of entry, all you would be doing is ending legal trade and travel, but migrants will just go between ports. According to, where are we? According to two people in the room, the president said, "I don't care." Ultimately, acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney seemed to have been able to talk the president out of closing the port of El Paso. Trump, however, was insistent that his administration begin taking another action, denying asylum seekers entry. Nielsen tried to explain to the president that the asylum laws allow migrants from Central America to come to the U.S. and gain entry. She talked to the White House counsel to see if there were any exceptions, but he told her that her reading of the law was correct. Neither the White House nor the Department of Homeland Security responded to official requests for comment. Last Friday, the president visited Calexico, California, where he said, quote, "We're full. Our system's full. Our country's full. Can't come in. Our country is full. What can you do? We can't handle any more. Our country is full. Can't come in. I'm sorry. It's very simple," end quote. Behind the scenes, two sources told CNN the president told border agents to not let migrants in. "Tell them we don't have the capacity," he said. "If judges give you trouble, say, 'Sorry, Judge, I can't do it. We don't have the room.'" After the president left the room, agents sought further advice from their leaders, who told them that they were not giving them that direction, and if they did what the president said, they would take on personal liability. "You have to follow the law," they were told. Senior administration officials also told CNN that in the last 4 months or so, the president has been pushing Nielsen to enforce a stricter and more widespread zero-tolerance immigration policy. Not just the original policy started by former Attorney General Jeff Sessions and undone by the president once it was criticized, that called for the prosecution of individuals crossing the border illegally between ports of entry, resulting in the separation of parents from children. According to multiple sources, the president wanted families separated even if they came in at a legal port of entry and were legal asylum seekers. The president wanted families separated even if they were apprehended within the U.S. He thinks the separations work to deter migrants from coming. Sources told CNN that Nielsen tried to explain they could not bring the policy back because of court challenges, and White House staffers tried to explain it would be an unmitigated PR disaster. "He just wants to separate families," said a senior administration official. Last night, on the second floor of the East Wing of the White House residence in a room called the Yellow Oval, Nielsen, Mulvaney, and the president met. Nielsen tried to present a path forward that was legal and in compliance with U.S. laws, but the president said to her, "This isn't working," and Nielsen did not disagree. At the end of the day, a senior administration official said, "The president refuses to understand that the Department of Homeland Security is constrained by the laws." So what's going on here exactly? A few days ago, the acting director and nominee to run ICE had his nomination pulled. Now we have Secretary Nielsen fired apparently for not being willing to push the president's demands, which appear to have been illegal. We also have the firing the director of the secret firing of, sorry, the word of is missing, of the director of the Secret Service. The chief lawyer at DHS is also reportedly on the way out, as is the head of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. This article just came out. Okay, we just talked about that. I'm lost my place. 3 days ago, as noted above, after Trump suddenly pulled the nomination of Ron Vitiello to run ICE because Trump wanted to move in a tougher direction. Much of this seems to have been at the urging of Stephen Miller, the former Sessions staffer who has been the driving force behind the president's immigration policy since the beginning. Trump apparently wants to return to the original family separation policy and perhaps make it more aggressive than it was a year ago. He also wants to flat out refuse asylum seekers altogether. Now put these different moving parts together, and this appears probable. Starting a few weeks ago, around the time he started threatening to close the border with Mexico, Trump began pushing for much more aggressive action at the border, a good deal of it against the law. His top appointees were apparently resisting these directives, and now a number of them have been or are in the process of being fired. That incident down at the border in which the president told line officers to stop letting anyone come across the border looks like a microcosm of this larger story. He told the officers to break the law. Their supervisors had to tell them that wasn't okay after Trump left. Now here's another part of the puzzle that doesn't quite seem to fit. Trump abruptly fired the head of the Secret Service today. We're told it wasn't any one thing, and it definitely wasn't about the recent controversy at Mar-a-Lago. It was just a bunch of different things. We should be highly skeptical of that claim. There's basically no time when we've seen some dramatic action like this from the Trump White House when there wasn't some kind of precipitating event, especially when they deny there was a precipitating event. The Secret Service is part of DHS, and if the president is purging the softies from DHS, maybe this is part of it. Again, that doesn't make sense. The Secret Service was moved from the Treasury Department to DHS when the latter was created in 2003, but it doesn't have that much to do with the rest of the department and has little connection to immigration policy at all. So the connection seems hard to figure. A short time ago, the outgoing Secret Service chief released a statement in which he said this, quote, "No doubt you have seen media reports regarding my firing. I assure you that this is not the case, and in fact was told weeks ago by the administration that transitions in leadership should be expected across the Department of Homeland Security. The President has directed an orderly transition in leadership for this agency, and I intend to abide by that direction. It is my sincere regret that I was not able to address the workforce prior to this announcement." End quote. This again seems iffy. Little about Alla's dismissal sounds like something planned and orderly, nor is it clear what transitions in leadership across the Department of Homeland Security is supposed to mean. Does that mean they're sacking the whole leadership across the whole department, or some substantial part of it? At this point, we mainly have questions, but there's some storm at the center of this that we have yet to get any solid explanation of. Okay, so think about that. Now, the easiest, perhaps, way to consider it would be that right now we have the slow motion revelations of the Mueller report. I mean, obviously, the initial pushback that like, oh, well, there's no, the president wasn't indicted on anything and there's no collusion, blah, 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 has been falling apart as it was almost destined to do. But, they tried. And so since then, little bits are peeking out around the edges, and soon we will have even more pieces. And so there is reason to believe that that this is a good time for the president to create some other problem over here that we're all supposed to go, oh, look at this drama, and let's just sort of ignore this whole bit over here. He does this all the time. So my reading of this is that he's decided he's going to create something that's so big and dramatic and such a problem